So let's start with top-down socks. And what I'm going to show you is the Kitchener stitch, which is typically what's used for the wedge toe and is demonstrated by the blue sock. To do the Kitchener stitch, you have to have all of your stitches equally divided between two needles. So once you have finished decreasing your round toe to the appropriate number of stitches, you're still going to have your sole stitches split between two needles. So the first thing you're going to do is just simply knit those last stitches on the second sole needle onto the first, because you want to have the yarn coming out of one of the edge stitches. And then to set up, you're going to cut your yarn about 4 times the width that you need to stitch. And I'm going to turn the sock around so that the yarn is coming out of the top needle. So I'll thread my yarn on a tapestry needle. And then, those of you who are familiar with the Kitchener stitch, you know that you alternate 3 different things. You alternate going through a stitch purlwise and going through a stitch knitwise, working a stitch off the front needle, working a stitch off the back needle, and sliding a stitch off the needle or leaving the stitch on the needle. So that's where the confusion comes from, because there's so many things that are alternating at the same time. The key to me is that the first time you go through a stitch, you go through it the opposite direction of the way you want it to look. So this is a knit stitch, and I will go through it purlwise, and that will anchor it. The second time you go through a stitch, you go through it the way you want it to look. So if it's a knit stitch, I'll go through it knitwise, and you take it off after you've gone through the second time. Now, some of you have probably done sock toes where you get kind of this chimney effect, where it sticks up and you get little points. And the way you get rid of those is you work the first 2 and last 2 stitches of each needle as if they're one. There's another way you can do it, and that's where you simply, I call it, you bind in the edge stitch, where you slide 2 stitches, the 2 edge stitches onto another needle, and then pick the outer stitch up and over the first, so it's bound in towards the center of the sock. Then you put that stitch back on the needle. Now you have to do that on all 4 corners. Okay, so here we are. I've got 4 stitches on each needle. Now I'll demonstrate the Kitchener stitch. Because I've bound in on the 2 needles, I'm going to treat each stitch individually instead of treating the 2 outer ones as one, because I've already taken away one of those outer ones. So the yarn is coming out of the back, so that means I'm going to come to the front needle first for the setup. It's a knit stitch, so I'm going to go through it purlwise and pull the yarn till it's snug, but don't choke it, because you want to mimic the tension of your knit stitches. Once you've anchored a stitch, you go to the other needle. So I come down and I go to the back needle now, or I bring the yarn back, and that's a purl stitch. So it needs to be anchored first, so I anchor it by bringing the tapestry needle through it, what we call knitwise, which is from left to right. You always have to keep your working yarn below the 2 needles, or you will inadvertently add a yarn over. Now, that first stitch on the back needle, or the top needle, has been anchored, so I come to the front needle. And those 2 steps were the setup. Now what I'm going to do is what you do over and over again. This first stitch is a knit stitch. It's already been anchored, so I'm going to take it off knitwise. I'm going to go through knitwise, slide it off the needle. I can't leave this front needle until I've anchored the next stitch on it. So I'm going to go through it purlwise to anchor it. Now I go to the back needle. That first stitch has been anchored knitwise, so I get to go through it purlwise to take it off. And I just pull the yarn till the slack is gone. Now I have to anchor the next stitch. It's a purl stitch, so I'm going to anchor it by going through it knitwise. I come to the front. That stitch has been anchored, so I get to take it off knitwise. And then I have to anchor the next stitch purlwise. Go to the back needle. That stitch has been anchored, so I'm going to take it off purlwise and anchor the next stitch knitwise. I come to the front, and by now you ought to be catching there's a rhythm here. This one's been anchored, so I'm going to take it off knitwise. And then I come to the next, and I have to anchor that next one purlwise. Can't take it off the needle yet because it's only been anchored. I go back to the back needle. It's been anchored knitwise, so now I get to take it off purlwise. And I anchor the next stitch knitwise. Now I come to the front needle. It's been anchored. I simply take it off knitwise. Try not to split your stitches. And I get to take it off. There's nothing more to anchor there, so I go right back to the back needle and I take off that last stitch purlwise. And there's my rounded toe. And to finish, simply put your hand inside the sock and dive down with the yarn and pull it snug. And there is the Kitchener stitch, which looks like the knitting is continuous from the front to back on the sock.